evening. Apologies, we're on page 6b, 36 in the Gemara. Sorry, Steve, I didn't have a chance to respond, which I should have done. We've made our way to page 6b, and know where to start. We'll start with the Brachot for Torah study, which is Baruch atah Adonai melech haolam v'yisrael v'tzivanu asok b'divrei Torah. And doing all right? Hopefully we're doing all right. I feel like we should just dive in. This is I don't know how much we'll skip or if we should, but we're going to start out. We're in Talmud, page 6b.
Right, you're going to put the link to the online or not?
Yes, I am, and I'm going to
Thank you.
do it. So Sfaria, it is 6b. Believe we the logical place to start is
Rabbi. Good evening, Rabbi. I've not been around for a while. What page? What daf are you on?
Page 36 in the Koran edition. Vav Amud Bet, 6b in the as one goes along. And if you're looking in the print edition, I'm going to start about one paragraph down from the top of the page. If you're looking online, I'm going to start on it's paragraph number 11. Now, what's been going on? This is what's going on. We've sort of skipped through a number of like different topics in the stream of consciousness style that we've mentioned, like that there's going from God's presence in prayer to God's wearing tefillin to knowing that when there's no minyan, God gets upset because God showed up early for minyan and then 10 people didn't come, and so God's angry and so forth. And then sort of ended with this section of the Rabbi Zera saying that, once I saw the rabbis running to go to a lecture on Shabbat. And I thought they were breaking Shabbat. Like, how can they do this? You're not supposed to run. This is putting too much of an effort out. But then I learned this. I learned this teaching that says, no, on Shabbat, run to learn Torah. That always like running to learn Torah is a thing. So even on Shabbat, run to learn Torah. And we did our own little back and forth on, that doesn't mean, doing something that would be sort of more significantly violative of Shabbat. Don't pay an entrance fee, right, or whatever it might be. But running sort of this borderline thing. Run to learn Torah. And he follows that by saying, and this is paragraph number 11, Rabbi Zera, Agra, Dafarka, Rachata, that the reward for the learning is running, which seems to be is for the running. That it's your eagerness to get there, sort of that gets you, in the colloquial phrase, the mitzvah points. That what God likes is that you ran to go learn. And what that's going to do is in the stream of consciousness style, and you can see sort of like on the page, again, on a typical Talmud page, it's all one block of text. What this edition does is sort of hits return a lot. And you see like each of these things is the same style of phrase. It'll be Rabbi so-and-so said, and then there will be 3 words. The reward for X is Y. This is when we say stream of consciousness. Like, so they were talking about Shabbat. Then he talks about running to learn on Shabbat. And then his follow-up statement is the reward for a lecture is for the running. Now we're going to get half a dozen statements that a rabbi so-and-so said, the reward for X is Y. And this is the way it works. So this isn't like a conversation that they had, presumably. It's just the editor pulling together all the time somebody said this 3-word statement, the reward for X is Y. The English will be very verbose. The beauty of the Aramaic is that it's all 3-word statements. So the reward for the lecture is in the running. Marabai, Agra, Dechala, Duchaka. The reward for the Kala, for going to the Kala, the convention, is for the crowding. We started talking about like what that means. It's sort of hard to say. Is this that it's sort of like unpleasant because it's so crowded, and so despite that, you're still going to learn. So like there's a so like that's sort of like the reward is that you inconvenience yourself for it. Corin takes, the editor here's take is that it's the reward is for, you might not hear so much because it's so crowded, and they we're 1800 years short of having invented a microphone, so you didn't really hear what was going on. But like, so like the reward is sort of like being there, that you like showed that you cared, even if you didn't actually learn anything. So the reward for going to the Kala is for the crowding. And again, this is where we get the word Kala for a get together. Next one. Amarav Agra Shmata Savra. The reward for, say, learning is logic. So they obviously put a little bit more in there, but you see, I mean, you can see the pattern. Agra is reward in each instance. The shamata, you know the root, it's shama, right? It's learning, it's hearing something and taking it in. Shama is one of our key words, right? Svara is logic. It's a fascinating statement because it's a little different than the earlier ones. The earlier ones had a bit of a different vibe to them, right? It was a little more abstract. It was again like the mitzvah points, sort of, the reward for something. But it was that like it's appreciated that you ran. It's appreciated that you went even to a crowded place where you couldn't quite hear. Here, the reward for learning is logic. It seems to be something that's a little more this worldly. I'm gaining in like an actual. It might not be a tangible benefit, but it's a noticeable this worldly benefit. And notice their commentary on in the English. Rava said the reward for learning, the halakhic traditions of the Moraim, which is to say the generations around Rava, the generations after the time of the Mishnah, is for the logical analysis, as the primary reward for studying Talmud is not given for knowing the halakhic conclusions, but for the logical reasoning that led to those conclusions. Could this get any more Jewish? Right? Not the point isn't just knowing the answer, but for being able to work through the steps that were used to get to the answer. Maybe a little bit like math, right? But note that there's there's a sense of the worth of the thinking your way through a problem. Not that you're not supposed to do the right thing. This doesn't mean that you can think your way through the problem and then go, eat a pulled pork fajita. Like that's not part of it. But that has its own value. So not that the conclusion isn't important, but this is also important.
Rabbi?
Yep.
So when I was in college, I had a math teacher. And one time we asked her how she graded, how she was going to grade. And it was so poignant. She said, listen, if you get the right answer for the wrong reason, you're wrong. How
Yeah.
unlike life is that? If you get the right answer for the wrong reason, I assume you were lucky, cheated, or did something incongruous.
Right. Right. So this, right. So Alan Commons, Talmud in a nutshell. So that there's something of value that, and that's part of why we're doing this, and like part of like, it's not just like. So the arc of Jewish history is that it's sort of like the things start, or like earlier levels have these sort of Talmudic arguments, but people get sick of that and people want like something straight. Just tell me what to do. So you have the Shulchan Aruch, which sort of just tells you what to do. Then you have Art Scroll, which just tells you what to do. But here they're saying that it's not just knowing. I mean, maybe this is for like people who are capable of learning the analysis, but if you can, the reward is for that, not just for knowing the conclusion, but for knowing how you got there. Amar of Papa, next one. Agra, the Taya, Stikuta. Rav Papa says the reward for being in a house of mourning is silence, or is for silence. God willing, will last for having houses of mourning, but God willing, will be able to be more in person in the near future, certainly in the distant future. But of course, when you go into a house of mourning, luckily, the proper behavior is quiet. Don't start just being with the person is the idea. And part of it is, don't force somebody into some small talk about the weather, or don't try to offer them false comfort, or as people will spin their theories of their own little theologies and things like this, but like just go and be there. So if you can go to a house of mourning, keep your mouth shut. There's the reward. I like that one. I like a lot too.
Rabbi, I sometimes disagree with that. The matters on the Shiva, sometimes you go there, it's really a celebration of life.
So outside of the not eating pulled pork fajitas, there are few rules that apply in 100% of situations. In our era, and one of the effects of modern medicine and of extended lifespans is that Shivas or mourning can take on different personalities, different moods. I have to say, like, I'm never quite one for treating any death as a celebration. I'm not a huge fan. And a lot of people say to a small group like this, like a lot of people use the phrase celebration of life. It hits me hard. I get when deaths aren't tragedies. Somebody dies and they're 97 years old and they're surrounded by family, like it's not tragic, right? But phrases like celebration feels odd attached to death.
Rabbi?
Yep.
It seems, I was thinking when you said that, and certainly in some Christian traditions, it's really viewed that way as a celebration. Is that because you're going to see Jesus, or is it?
Yep. And so, not speaking for everybody or everybody else, but I think commonly, yes, meaning that, because I think some who say that, obviously exceptions, it's because this world is something of a false world of suffering, and and true life, everlasting, is on the other side of the curtain. And so you hear that in some of the phrasing, has been called home. God just wanted him more, like phrases like that. And if it's framed that way, then I sort of it makes sense.
And certainly you hear the phrase, which I don't think is part of our tradition, that the person's going to a better place. And certainly, in the New Orleans tradition, there's a big celebration, which is perhaps unique there.
Right. So I like citing that, which is that there's certain things where if it feels sort of like a honest and organic to the culture, Baruch Hashem. But yeah, we tend not to treat anything as a celebration in terms of death, because it's sad when somebody's not dying, drawing breath anymore. And again, there are, especially now, there are situations where death may be a welcome respite from a very difficult life, or for a very, very difficult period of life, or ending stage of life. So it doesn't mean that it's just not that every death is tragic, or that every death is wrong, that you should always pray for life, because there are situations where that may not be the case. And it's still a sad thing. But yeah, like one of my teachers, Rabbi Eliezer Shochet, who, when he taught me 20 years ago, must have been 80. So he said when he was a young rabbi, just out of JTS and out to LA. So he must have been in his maybe late 20s. That the next door neighbor called him in that a child had died. And they called him in because he was the rabbi next door, before the priest could get there, the minister could get there. And he came in with all of his so tragic. This is just weeping and somber, and said the minister came in and started with the whole glory, hallelujah. This is wonderful. God called him back, and he's in a better place, and started everyone dancing and singing that the pain of this world was gone, and the joy of the next world was present. So again, that's a whole theology. I've got as much information on the afterlife as anyone else does, which is to say, precisely none. So I can't speak to the truth or falseness of that, on a meta level, but not a typical Jewish approach. But I would say, as a general, I've been in enough shiva houses where where I hear things that certainly make me cringe, and I'm obviously sensitive to theologies and the whole God doesn't give you anything you can't handle. What? So if I was a little weaker, then I wouldn't have had to deal with this, this, all that. Anyway, so Rav Papa, at the very least, thinks that the reward for attending a shiva house is for keeping your mouth shut. Or maybe we can adapt that with respect to Harris and everyone else, that for keeping your mouth shut when it's appropriate to keep your mouth shut.
Rabbi?
Yep.
There's a couple of things. First of all, in Jewish funerals, the casket is always closed, lest you say something that the dead person cannot bad about the dead person and who can no longer defend himself. And so there's the silence to me is
Nice.
really of saying something that you shouldn't say, both both at the funeral and at the shiva.
I'm curiously, they're not linked one to the other, but hold that thought. That's going to be super relevant in a moment. Do you have a back half of that? But like, hold that thought. That's thank you. So the next one is Marmar Sutra, Agra Datanita Zraka. Mazutra said the reward for fasting is tzedakah. What's the reward that you get? So I don't know if this could be this world or the next world. For fasting is not for the fast. It's for the tzedakah that you give while you fast. This is, he apparently has listened to the Haftarah for Yom Kippur, where Isaiah says, if you beat your chest and say pious things, but ignore people who are suffering, I, God, hate that. That's a sham. Don't sully my name that way, right? Like, so it's sort of powerful Haftarah on Yom Kippur that pulls out. So he says, like, look, the reward for fasting is for the tzedakah that you're giving. Again, he sees them as linked. He doesn't say just give the tzedakah, but they're linked. Here they say, see Isaiah 58. That's the Yom Kippur Haftarah. Don't fast without. Don't say I'm sorry without making amends. Relevant, by the way, that of course is the Torah portion this week is Achrei. It's the Torah reading for Yom Kippur, and relevant, I think, in the rite on Yom Kippur. I can go off on a little Yom Kippur tangent. Road test this idea on you guys. Is there's a scapegoat. Aaron takes two goats, identical. One of them is sacrificed. He randomly chooses. One of them sacrificed to God, and one of them Lazazel confesses all the sins of the people on this other one, and they go and they send it off into the wilderness to die. That's the scapegoat, right? The people feel better for having sacrificed this thing that carried their sins. I am of the opinion that societies still do this, including our own, where we take usually someone, often somebody prominent, put all of our sins on them, send them off into the wilderness, punish them somehow, and then feel better about ourselves. If we fire Matt Lauer, we no longer we've sort of cleansed ourselves of the sin of workplace sexual harassment, and now he's our scapegoat, our sacrifice, and now we feel better. We convict Derek Chauvin, rightly so, and now we feel better. But of course, it only works to the reward for fasting is for the tzedakah. It only works if you actually do the work behind it. The people had through the Yom Kippur thing, confess and change. Then the scapegoat ritual is what's the word I'm looking for? Where you feel cleansed. It's cathartic. It's a catharsis, and that can work for us as a society too. But you can't just put your sins on Derek Chauvin and send him up the river and be cleansed. You actually have to do the other work as well to merit that.
Isn't that like at Rosh Hashanah with Tashlik, where we throw the bread into the
Yes, right. But yes, though even more so when the scapegoat almost has to be alive. Like there's a bit of it in Tashlich, and you're supposed to be confessing your sins and throwing it away, but there's something that's there's a certain power. There's a reason why the Aaron Torah this week is doing it with a goat, something alive, And I think, and this isn't just me, this is like sort of like Mary Douglas and other sociologists. I think we do it with celebrities and the like.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
Is that similar to the Shlugging Kapouris that the Orthodox used to do? I don't know if they still do.
So, yes, still. So in a way, Shlugging Kapouris is a little bit more like tashlich, right? I mean, though, in that case, you're taking a chicken and putting it around your head, and giving, again, like then the chicken is supposed to be slaughtered and given to the poor, like that's again like the mitzvahs for the tzedakah, but that's very much transferring your sins to the chicken. So somewhat similarly, it's in the same vein, but again, like I think the cathartic part is in the sort of like greater emotional attachment, which I think probably existed with the goat on Yom Kippur, that this, the sort of the drawing of lots and the sort of majesty of it all, like gave it this thing. And similarly, I think with us, like you have to feel like something has changed. Shlugging Kippur is obviously, it feels like the stakes are higher than throwing bread. It's actual chicken. So that's been on my mind this week. I'm thinking about obviously sort of like where our society is at, and sort of like ensuring that like that scapegoating, like, I think has its values, but like has to be done properly in order for it to have its value. The next one, Amar Rav Sheshet, Agra Lechespeda Deluve. The reward for giving a hesped for a eulogy is in that they'd raise their voice and cry. This is why I thought when Ed was speaking, the reward for the person giving a eulogy is causing the mourners to cry. That pushing, like sort of like pushing people, like making sure that is sort of like from the heart and emotional. You're supposed to like help people through their grief by making sure that it's not pushed down further, but that it comes out. So, and this certainly, I mean, in this culture, in the Talmud, and it's not absent from the Middle East today, the more you wailed, so like the more grief-stricken you were, and like the more love you had, and it's proper to wail loudly. One part of the Talmud that deals with mourning, there's a reference to hired wailers. People would hire women to wail at funerals, to sort of like increase the grieving. I mean, it's like the opposite side of like having plant in a comedy audience of people who laugh loudly. And like if you have someone there who's laughing loudly, it makes it easier for other people to laugh. They did that with funerals and with tears. Again, not for me to judge, part of the culture. Anyway, so the reward for giving the eulogy is if you get the mourners to cry. Maravashi, Agra, Dve Chalule, Mile. The reward for a wedding is for the words. That's sort of a tougher one. Like, is it? It seems to be like sort of like praising the bride and the groom. That's the essence of it. Like what reward do you get for going to a wedding? Maybe making them feel, the bride and groom feel good. That seems to be what's going on there. So now we're going back to our topic. That's just, again, very typical of the Talmud. Somebody said something, and and the editor just then like throws in all the reward for this is that statements that he had, or the ones that he wanted to add, and now we're back to the topic. Just the way it works. Sometimes there'll be a keyword. It'll say goofa, which means like goof, like body, like back to the body of what we're saying. It doesn't here, but often like after it goes off on a tangent, they'll sort of consciously say, all right, let's get back on track here. Like you might in a meeting or something like that. All right, come on, people, let's get back on. Go back on track, sort of. Amar Rav Huna, Kol mipalel achrei Beit HaKnesset nikra rasha, shene'amar saviv ha'risha'im yitalechun. Rav Huna said, one who prays behind the synagogue, behind the Beit HaKnesset, is called rasha, wicked. As it says, the wicked walk round about. So this seems, what's going on here? Walking roundabout seems to be like walking round about the synagogue, like out round to the other side, like like, are you, it could be either that you're facing the wrong direction, or maybe you're separating from people. Like you're sort of like, somebody walks by and says, oh, look, Rabbi Dan's davening outside, the people inside must be not up to his standard. Right? Like, so like there's a, like you're sort of like, you're dissing the synagogue, or maybe you're facing the wrong way. Or maybe you think you're too good for it. Something like that.
This sounds like the wicked son in the Passover Haggadah. And it says, what the Lord did for you, and he does not consider himself part of the people, and that's why he's called wicked. And here, this particular person feels he's going to pray, but he's not part of the congregation, and that is where I see he's separating himself from the people.
Right. Yep. He's so that definitely is one possibility. Like being like don't do it. If you're gonna daven inside, they have no problem obviously with davening outside, but it's like it's like too much of a statement to be next to or behind the synagogue, right? And they bring a quote from Psalms to back them up. Amar Abai, next statement, it says, Lo amran ela de lo mared afal leve kanishta, aval mared afal leve kanishta, leitlan ba. Says, you know, that previous statement about, you know, if you pray behind the synagogue, you're a rasha. That's only taught when you don't turn your face towards the synagogue. But if you turn toward the synagogue, we don't say it there. It's okay. That doesn't apply. Meaning here, it seems to be, he seems to say, this is only like when you like are standing with your back to the synagogue. If you're facing, if you're facing it, there might be another reason why you're out there. That's not a big deal. Okay. It's only like literally turning your back on the whole operation. That's it. So what he does is he's narrowing it, right? Like sort of, this is again, sort of a typical move. We have a general rule, and then we have somebody else coming in and being like, yeah, I know it says that, but it really means this. It applies only in a narrow situation. It doesn't apply over here. It only applies over here. Only when you're not facing it. But then we have this next story that seems to up the stakes. We're going to stick with Ed's theme of Passover. One of our favorite characters from Passover is going to pop up here. There's this one guy who davened behind the synagogue, opposite the synagogue. And he didn't face the synagogue. Halach Eliyahu. Halav Eliyahu. Eliyahu Navi came up to him. Elijah passed by. Azay, and appeared to him. Adima le Kataya. Appeared to him as an Arab or as a member of a tribe that's related to an Arab tribe. So something like this. It's not their typical word for Arab, but like they think Arab could be like a or similar ethnicity, a similar tribe. But the Elijah doesn't look like Elijah to this guy. Looks like so like an average guy of the area. Amarle, Eliyahu says to him, Katatu bar kayama kame marach. Elijah says, this is how you stand before your maker? Shalach sfara kilara. Elijah drew a sword and killed him. And these are heartwarming stories of Elijah the prophet. So what do we have here? We have another story of Elijah. Remember, Elijah's made a couple of appearances, including, like sort of in the ruin, giving the guy a little halachic advice. Oh, when you daven, like you shouldn't daven in the ruin, you should daven over here. He gives advice like that. Talks about, and he appears a couple of times. Rarely is he as active as he is here. Elijah, of course, in the Tanakh, in the Book of Kings, is not a lovable, cuddly character. He is no teddy bear. He is he's sharp. And here, and here he uses lethal force.
Rabbi, why does he have to disguise himself as an Arab or a pseudo-Arab? What is the need of that?
I would think so. I don't know. It could be, sort of like staying within the story. It could be if he's recognizable as Eliyahu, the guy will change his behavior. He wants to appear as somebody maybe with no stake in this game. Like, what would this person care what I'm doing? It's sort of loaded. Like, you could give it a negative valence, that sort of like bloodletting could never be done by somebody who looked proper, would only make sense coming out of an Arab, or the opposite side. Guess who cares just as much about God and treating God properly? This average-looking Joe. So I think you could spin it either way if you wanted to make it pro or con, but I don't know.
These last three paragraphs have talked about the wicked davening. Isn't this kind of like an oxymoron, like contradiction in terms?
No, we.
Why would a wicked person be davening in the first place?
Turn on the TV and you'll find
Plenty of hypocrisy.
Right, Christian preachers who are have private jets for Jesus. You'll find pious Jews who don't seem to have their priorities in the right order. Bernie Madoff in the last week died. Obviously, he was on the board at Yeshiva University. We had to own that stuff for us. Obviously, the same exists in the Muslim world. The same exists in the secular world. There are plenty of people who just who talk about human values and things like this and end up in the wrong place at the wrong time. So it's true. It's true for anyone. What's curious here is that it's comparatively low level offense. So that's if you're looking in the physical text, there's a note on the left side that says Eliyahu passed by, appeared to him as an Arab, and killed him. Even the editor here says, this text is difficult. Though the action described is reprehensible, that's the davening in the wrong spot, it does not warrant the death penalty, by the way. Another version of the story reads, a certain Arab passed by and saw that he turned his face away from the synagogue, meaning that it was not Elijah, but an actual Arab, meaning that who saw this individual act as contemptuous towards God. Even this non-Jew was offended by his actions. He took out his sword and killed the man in anger. So in that version, it's sort of a we have a common societal obligation that includes treating God with respect. And if you're doing it the right way, then fine. But you seem to be turning your back on God. And none of us do that. So in that, though I will point out these stories are pre-Islam, but yeah.
But hasn't Elijah, isn't there a story about Elijah saying to God, the Jews are not going to keep the faith. They're going to go away from it. They're going to leave it. And that's why Elijah has to be present at every bris.
Mm-hmm. Right. As the Midrash as to why Elijah has to show up at brises, because he's in the book of Kings, he says, they've abandoned you. And that the part of his deal is that, they haven't, like when he says they've abandoned your covenant. So every time we reaffirm the covenant, Elijah is there to witness that we are reaffirming the covenant. So yes, this is one of the Elijah stories. It's an unusual one, but there you are. It's part of why we're doing this is to get the uncensored sort of like raw versions of things, and not to let me cherry pick the things that are feel good Torah, but to like encounter the troublesome text as well. And here, obviously, we would be very uncomfortable with any system where praying the wrong way merits death. This is more or less what we live in fear of, such a thing. But here it is. There's no, which is again sort of with all humility, like when we speak of when somebody cherry picks lines from other people's holy books and see they're terrible people, I always approach that with a degree of humility because I've read our holy books. Yeah. Anyway, don't daven around back of the synagogue, not facing the synagogue, because you never know what will happen. That definitely is a useful takeaway. Weiter, we'll continue along. This is the top of page 37 in the Koran, and it's verse it's chapter or paragraph number 21 in the Svarya. Oh, one last word on that last one. Like the fact that it's like that, literally, it's Hahu Gavra. It's like literally this one guy gives it a sense of legend, right? Like sometimes if they give a name, it's like, wow, did that really happen? But this could be the rabbinic version of my cousin knew a guy who said that, who had a friend who said that he saw Elijah. So when it says like there's this guy who, like, it sort of gives you a degree of
it's the idea that, I mean, during the time of the temple, was God sort of having his presence in the temple?
Yes.
When it was destroyed and later we have a synagogue, is it the same idea?
Yes. The synagogue is a mikdash ma'at. It's a mini temple, as it were, capital T, a mini Beit HaMikdash. And if you remember, thank you for saying that. It's prompting my mind to link to earlier things that we just did, right? When it says that when 10 pray together, God is with them, or God's waiting for the minyan to start. So with those statements in mind, when I'm turning my back, I'm literally turning my back on God in that sense. So, and again, it's like anything else. Royal protocol is you don't turn your back on the sovereign, right? You don't turn your back on the queen. You walk out, as we've all experienced, you walk out, you don't turn around, you walk facing her. I'm guessing. So same, yeah, so good. Don't turn your back on God. Next one, Amarle. Bevai, Barabaye. And this is said to Rav Bevai Barabaye. When I first learned this, I learned it out of an unvocalized text, meaning a standard Talmud without vowels in it. So I didn't know that this was pronounced Rav Bevai. I just went with Beit Yud. Right? We thought it was Rav Bibi, and we would. This was back after Bibi's first term as prime minister, before he had his comeback. And we would, whenever Rav Bibi would appear, we would quote it in like an imitation Netanyahu voice. But now I know we don't get to do that. It's Rav Bevai, not Rav Bibi. Anyway. Amarle, Hahu, Maravanan, Rav Bevai, Barabai. Bevai Barabai says. And some say Rav Bevai said to Rav Nachman, Yitzhak, what does it mean, the back half of the verse? The verse that they quoted, the wicked walk round about when vileness is exalted among the sons of men, from this line from Psalm 12 that they quote, says, so what's that mean? The first half, when vileness is exalted among, or the wicked walk round about, they're saying, that means the guy who walks around to the back of the shul, while everyone else is davening. Outside of it, right? Not inside of it. What does the back half mean when violence is exalted among men? Amarle, and so the teaching on this was, he said to him, Elu Devrim she'omdim berumo shel olam v'nei adam zelzin b'hem. These are the matters of utmost importance, exalted mitzvot of prayer, which people treat with contempt. What does it mean when violence is exalted among the sons of men? When people treat, he says, important things as unimportant, and then the flip side would be unimportant things as important. He's using it as a way to say that people treat important things like going on. Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Eliezer, the Amrei Tevahu, Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Eliezer, they both said, Kevan, shenistarif adam levriut, panav mishtanot karkum, senema, karum zulat livnei adam. Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Eliezer said that once when a person needs others, his face changes to become like a karkum, as it's said, when karum, vileness, is exalted among the sons of men. They're giving a different explanation. They're saying, when you need somebody else's help and you sort of their implication is that and you're humiliated in having to ask for it, your face changes and becomes karum, which is their pun on vileness. Karum, they don't translate here, but this is where it's helpful to have the paper edition, which the Talmud will often name what might be an animal, and you don't know, and it doesn't, and you don't know what it is. So here they give a theory that it's this little fellow, that this it says. Some identify the karum as the shining starling, which is indigenous to the area, ranging from Western equatorial Africa to Sudan. The starling, as well as another indigenous to Eastern Africa and the banks of the Red Sea, have characteristics similar to the bird described by the sages. The color of the bird's feathers is not the result of a pigment in the feathers themselves, but the unique configuration of the feathers and the way the sun reflects off them. I'm not sure I understand. I don't know if if it's saying that your face changes in a way that does it become red? Does it take on a different pallor, a different color because you're humiliated how you're asking? I'm not quite sure how to understand what they're saying.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
it says here, once a person needs the help of others, and I'm reading it, and loses dignity in their eyes. In other words,
Right.
They make him feel small.
Right.
Then his face changes, and he's humiliated. So that he
Right.
does not look the way he should. He loses his stature.
Right. Loses face. And right. Right. I hear what you're saying. I'm just not exactly sure how to like make all the words work and then into the verse. When karum, when maybe this bird or vileness is exalted among the sons of men. Karum, zulat livnei adam. The next one, I mean, so I'll come back to that in a second, maybe. So the other rabbis will continue in this vein. My karum, what does it mean, karum? Kiata Rav Dimi, or when Rav Dimi came, he said, he's one who travels from the land of Israel to Babylon. So the editor is speaking in Babylon. So he's first when Rav Dimi came, it's like, people who are could work in New York and LA. He works in the land of Israel and in Babylon. He said, Ovachad, yes, bekake ayam, krum shmo, bekevan, shehema zuchrat, merefes lakama gavanim. Rav Dimi said that there's a bird in the cities by the sea called karum, and when the sun rises, the bird changes several colors. So he explains this as being, this bird on the banks of the Red Sea, presumably, or like back where I come from. You guys don't know it here in Babylon, but I live in the land of Israel. I live closer to the water. We've got different species there. And there's this one species called karum, which changes depending on the time of day, depending on the situation. So he's then explaining the previous statement as being when you have to ask for something in a humiliating way, or maybe to stick with Phyllis, like when you're made to be humiliated because you have to ask, that your face changes color.
Rabbi, what does it mean dependent on someone? I mean, if you ask somebody a question, it's like a very strange statement.
This is like, I need to borrow some money. I'm in a tough spot. I need 10 grand. This is, I think they're talking about that, of like, not an innocent question or not a small request, but something that sort of puts you socially and significantly like in somebody else's debt. They're now above you. I messed up. Whatever it might be. I lost my business, made a bad investment. I have a judgment against me. I gambled too much, whatever, whatever it is. And I need to borrow. I need to borrow 10 grand, I need to borrow 20 grand, right? Like, so you feel smaller. Or if maybe he says that or it's something different, I need to borrow 5 grand. And somebody says, you what? How could you be so dumb? I told you not to gamble like that. So it could be something like that. And the person and the asker loses face. So the little background thing, if you're looking at the paper edition, it has a nice comment on the top of the page. It says, what does it mean when Rav Dimi came? I mentioned Rav Dimi was one of the sages who descended or would often travel from Eretz Israel to Babylonia. If you go making Aliyah, you go up to Eretz Israel, which means that if you leave, you're descending. Primarily transmit the Torah of Eretz Israel to the Torah centers of the diaspora, although occasionally traveled on business as well. Consequently, many questions, particularly those concerning the Torah of Eretz Israel, remained unresolved until the messenger from Zion would arrive and elucidate the halakha, the novel expression, or the unique circumstances pertaining to a particular statement that required clarification. So here, if we read it that way, they have a statement, and Rabbi Yochanan taught this, and in Babylonian, they have no idea what it means. Then somebody visits from the land of Israel and be like, oh, they're talking about this bird that you guys can't see here because it just doesn't exist here. But back there, this is its qualities. That's what it means. So this, by the way, is also a nice thing. Again, a bit of humility. Again, a bit of understanding that different people in different places have different sets of knowledge, and that you and that for a broader set of knowledge, you need experiences outside of your own.
Rabbi?
Yep.
I'm confused. Who is the vile one here? Is it the one asking for the money, or is it the one giving the money with conditions? Is this?
It's not clear. Because there are two ways of reading it, or multiple ways of reading it. One is that somebody here is vile. And in that situation, presumably, if it's the individual making you feel small, because there's no, if that's the case, I didn't do anything wrong. I just, there's a pandemic and I got laid off and I'm behind on my rent payments. Like there's no, you make a better living than I do. Like there's no implication of shame. It's not, I spent it all on drugs. So could be that, or maybe the person was giving willingly and the person did spend it all on drugs and that's why I need some money, in which case that, or it has nothing to do with vileness. It's the word for vileness is the word for the bird. So it's just that it could just be the social situation that is vile, that when somebody's made to feel small because they have to ask, that's no good. Or maybe it's like just the whole gestalt of any system where where somebody's made to feel small because they're in need, and that you should have a system where people in need can not feel shamed. There's at least one more thought in this regard, the next one, so we should do it. Ravami, Ravasi, Ravami and Varasi, they both said, this is two then consecutive statements of two rabbis saying things together. Ravami and Ravasi both said, one who becomes dependent on others, it's as if he was punished with two punishments, fire and water. As stated, you have caused men to ride over our heads who have gone through fire and water. So this is like, not only is it difficult to be in need, not to be master of your own fate, as it were, but also there's a sort of shame of having to ask. And that, they say, is like, it's a double, that that being dependent on others is a double punishment. It's not as if being in need isn't bad enough, but that you need to ask somebody else, then socially see them, even worse. Notice how they're all over the place. All over the place in the sense of, you know, and they go in a quick step from the importance of not praying behind the synagogue building, to sort of like there's nothing worse than sort of like being in somebody's debt. Like there's they get there really quickly, and the next thing is how important it is to daven mincha. Like, so they hop pretty quickly, and this is part of the style of what's going on.
Rabbi,
Sir,
can I ask you a technical question?
yes.
Are we having class next week, given what's going on?
Probably not. I feel like it's I'll say probably not, because it'd probably be good for me not to be with you, because I mean, times being what they are, it's not like there's family coming in from out of town, but I'm sure there'll be some crisis. So let's assume that we're punting next week. Might be 2 weeks worth of punting, but certainly at least next week for Eitan's having a bar mitzvah on May the 1st, and God knows it's a scene. Yeah.
So you're not doing either classes. Thursday's off.
Thursday morning I might be able to pull off. We'll see. Let me get a better grip on what the story is. So
Okay.
yeah.
As far as the morning class goes that I couldn't get into, is it somewhere that I can find it, or is it?
It should be youtube.com